Hello, spiritually confused, seekers. Welcome to your source for further spiritual confusion, instruction. Recently, I posted a video wherein I spoke of how a certain intensity in your practice, usually at a retreat, specifically I was referring to Daiseshin Zen Buddhist retreats. In these retreats, we always do koan practice with a Rinzai Zen master. Okay, now in this video, I spoke perhaps hastily or clumsily about koan practice. I did this because I was
feverish
from COVID. And the more I talked, the more this fever was like blazing in my head and casting up fumes of smoke. And I became sort of passionate. And I want to unpack and explore and not necessarily contradict, but complexify something that I brought up in that video, which is that when you do a very intense spiritual practice of any kind, it can be the sadhus in the outskirts of a Indian town. What else could it be? The guys with the whips who go, whoosh, whoosh, I love Jesus, whoosh. Like whatever it is, your spiritual practice, very intense spiritual practice I said in this video, it can manufacture a spiritual experience. Someone then, interestingly, using interesting language, corrected me in the comments section over on Patreon. Hey! Speaking of Patreon, you can become a member right here at patreon.com/ShozanJackHoffman. But more on that at the end of the video. But for now, I'd like to say this gentleman made a comment on my Patreon page where he said maybe it's not quite right to say that intense spiritual work can manufacture these spiritual experiences, but rather induce them. Can intense spiritual training rituals induce a spiritual experience? And is like that the point of these rituals and practices? Or are the experiences themselves kind of fake because they're brought about or inspired by or catalyzed by certain environments? Like, what are we talking about here? Let's investigate. First of all, I want to be really clear about what koan practice is, what it's meant to be, and exit the realm of abstractions or mystifications or romanticizing, okay? So, koan practice, specifically, if you're not sure what it is, we called it Sanzen at the monastery where I trained, and Sanzen was a private, one-on-one meeting between a Zen student and his or her teacher. Okay, so the teacher has given you a koan. Now, as we all know, some of the classic, almost cliched koans are, the sound of two hands clapping. What is the sound of one hand? Okay. Another famous koan is, and I love this one, it never grows old. What did your face look like before your parents were born? What is your original or true face? You like that one? Me too. So, okay, these are two classic koans. There are collections of koans. One is called the Hekigan Roku. Then one is called the Mumon Koan. A koan is like an unsolvable problem you gotta solve. You can't solve it through logic. You cannot solve it through reason. You cannot even solve it through words. So my teacher, Joshu Sasaki Roshi, who spoke in broken English to begin with, was oftentimes very expressive with his body language and exuding broken sentences in the English language when you came into the room with him. It's almost like you were speaking like in some sort of like foreign original tongue with him. We called it Mount Baldy English. You would be like, because he was deaf, you'd be shouting at him in these broken sentences and he might shout 3 or 4 words back at you. So already you're engaged in a different kind of interaction with him. You would come into the room, there's all sorts of form involved in this practice. I mean, if I can rewind a little bit, you're in the zendo, you're being yelled at by the officer in charge of discipline in this meditation space. He's shouting here and there, he's making sure you're sitting up straight, your robes are, not slovenly, you're following all the rules, and he's been yelling at you all week, and yelling at everybody all week, and you feel like you're in this tightly contained, like, military barracks, right? And you're ready to explode. Well, there's one time you can explode. That's when the gong, gong, shika hits the bell indicating, which he or she will do at certain times of the day, 4 times a day when we were at the Mount Baldy Zen Center, indicating that the time has come for Sanzen practice. Now, when you hear that bell, you can jump up off your cushion and run to Sanzen. So all this energy has been pressed together in the zendo, pressed and pressed and pressed by this tight, rigid, over-disciplined, slightly militaristic samurai Zen atmosphere. That's why I grabbed my girlfriend's katana swords. Here, they're not mine, they're hers. They're real katana swords. She used to sword fight. I don't know. Anyways, we practice samurai Zen in the Rinzai tradition. So the pressure cooker of the zendo is released when the shika hits the Sanzen bell. And you can go to Sanzen whenever you want. You can take your time going up there, or you can, but a lot of people, you were encouraged to leap off your cushion and to run through the snow, sometimes in bare feet. Some people were doing it, bloody feet, very dramatic. You would come in through the Sanzen waiting room, hit a bell 3 times, come down into Roshi's cabin and do your bows. My point is there's all this form. And then you're leading up to this moment when you're looking at the teacher. You've done your bows, you're looking up at the teacher. Now the form is, this is the last part of form. Do you understand? Like, kind of follow me here, please. This is the last piece of form. The form is, my koan is, and you say your koan that Roshi's given you, and now you give your answer, okay? Now you give your answer. And it is volcanic, or it's as delicate and quick as the heartbeat of a hummingbird, It's as silent and alive as a field of growing green grass. Or it's lame. That was usually the case. I can't tell you how many times I hauled ass through the snow, leapt into the Sanzen room, said my koan, and then I had nothing. And Roshi would look at me like, yeah, more Zazen. That was his common phrase, more Zazen, which meant go back to the cushion, sit down, and do your meditation practice. Because, and this is my point, Sanzen and koan practice, despite all the cliches around it, despite the David Carradine, kung fu, snatch the pebble from my hand type cliches around koan practice, the truth is, it's not a unique, it's unique, but it's not an ultra special or supernatural, it's not woo-woo, it's a practice. That's all it is. So when you go into the Sanzen room, you are practicing in front of your teacher, if that makes any sense. So Sanzen practice, koan practice, is straight up an extension of, you could say, your sitting practice. It's no different. You've simply lifted that practice up off the cushion and you're bringing it into the Sanzen room. Now, what makes this practice unique and maybe even seemingly spiritual, or not spiritual, supernatural sometimes, is that you're doing your practice in front of someone. You're like showing this person what you've learned, if you will, or where you're at. You're opening yourself up and you're revealing them yourself to them and your practice to them in a way that's intimate and unfamiliar to most people. But there's a knack to it. My mentor used to say, look, it's like a vocabulary. It's like you're learning a new vocabulary. My own teacher, Sasaki Roshi, used to say, look, a good koan student is a good actor. You have to get how to do it, right? So it's not woo-woo. It's just a different kind of practice. It's a pretext to work with the teacher. And if you get good at doing koan practice, you can manifest an answer to the type of koan you're being given. And you can manifest this truth. And in the Rinzai Zen tradition, that's really important, to be able to sort of, instead of give an answer with your mouth, your being produces the answer to the koan. And in this way, you can more, clearly or truthfully move through the world in all the different circumstances you may find yourself in. Now I'm going to get very specific about koans, which I shouldn't do because basically one is not supposed to talk about koans. I'm going to tell you a story now. That will give you a specific example of what I'm talking about. What I'm about to do is spiritual pornography. Pornography! This is spiritual pornography, what I'm about to say. But I'm going to say it because it was helpful for me when I heard this story, and I don't want to be mystical about this. But I shouldn't do this because it's just dumb. It's just dumb. But I'm going to do something dumb now. Okay, here we go. I was hanging out with a Zen monk once, and he was talking about koan practice. And he said, and he wasn't supposed to do this, but he did it because he's great. I love this guy. He just told me the story. He said, I didn't know anything about koans. I didn't know what I was doing, and that's everybody's experience. He said I would go into Roshi and I would give him my koan, and I had no idea how to answer it. And he said, then one day I talked to Taido. Taido is a senior monk, and Taido said to me, "Oh, you're a new student. Yeah, you must be on that koan that Roshi gives out, like, where is God when you see a bird in the sky? Or how do you manifest snake in the grass? How do you manifest snake activity?" Might be a koan that Roshi would give you. Well, how do you answer that? Roshi gave untypical, untraditional koans. How do you manifest snake? Now, that's a weird question, isn't it? And the monk, Taido, answered it. He said, then you got to do the thing. And he did something like that, right? And in that moment, my other friend got it. And he knew how to answer a koan. He knew how to answer this koan, this first basic koan. So someone in a similar way, a senior monk once told me, look, there's two types of koans. There's only two types of koans. There's death and there's resurrection. He said, you die into your answer, and then the resurrection happens. Those are the two types, those only two types of koans you're ever going to get. They're going to be some version of that, some permutation of that. The death and birth in different contexts with more sophistication, sometimes less, sometimes different. But those are the two basic koans you're going to get. So that very first koan is like a death koan. okay? And it's deep and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And I don't really want to go into it so much because maybe you can get a taste for this sort of thing. Like when you see a tree, how do you dive into the tree and then prove it? How do you do that? Can you lose yourself completely in front of the teacher? It was an interesting experience. Like, do you know the principle behind connection, people? Connection, you know? When you look at your beautiful daughter when she runs in the room, are you thinking about how proud you are to be her father and how well you've done in your job as a daddy or a mommy? Because that's not love, that's not connection, right? That's ego. Look at that specimen which I am responsible for. Your heart leaps, right? It leaps. Manifest that leaping when the self is lost, when it's dissolved. Manifest that for your teacher. That's you dying into the activity, dying into snake, dying into the sun, dying into the bird. Or she would ask you all these koans, right? And then you had to manifest your answer, okay? You'd manifest the dying activity, and then you would get your resurrection koans, and you would manifest the resurrection, or the resurrection would manifest, I should say. I don't know if I've been able to correctly manifest how helpful this kind of practice can be. I think you can see, like, you get off your cushion where you're just doing Zazen, inhale and exhale, and inhale and exhale. And you get to manifest that principle of no self, of giving, of composure and loss of ego. You get to manifest that in front of a teacher. And it's like I said earlier, it's a pretext to interact with a teacher. It's a pretext to get one-on-one instruction. So it's a tool to work with a Zen master. That's a koan. And the question that arises that a lot of people have is, okay, you've got this tool and you're working with your teacher. I mean, and then something happens and you think it's a big enlightenment experience, but was it brought about just through an overexertion between you, from you, an overexertion, all the things are in place for you to have this experience and then you just trick yourself into having it? I can only say that it seems to me that a good teacher is definitely not going to affirm anything but anything. Probably my teacher affirmed nothing, basically nothing. Zero. That was his teaching. Zero. That was it, right? I mean, my experience was you would just get the next koan, you know? Yeah, you would just get the next koan from him. You didn't get affirmed. So I don't have an answer to this problem. I mean, you go into Mass or you go to a Catholic seminary and you pray your heart out, you know? And then you have a spiritual experience. Has it been induced by all the ornamentation, the priest, the host, the Mass, the hard marble you're kneeling on, all your pain and all your suffering, pushing you to this moment where you're giving, and God appears? Did you make God up, you know? I mean, these are questions we can work on and we can think about and we can contemplate. I will say this, like, what do you know, in defense of intense spiritual practices, like, how good are most of us doing on our own without these experiences? I was doing very poorly. I mean, I had all kinds of illusions that were mental and intellectual about what the spiritual life meant and what it meant to embody a kind of truth. The type that are necessary, the type of embodiment or manifestation that's necessary to answer a koan. I mean, I had a very, very, very superficial understanding of spiritual practice, informed by my 4 years of intellectual masturbation, otherwise known as a philosophy degree from the University of Dallas. So, is it fake? Is it induced? Is it forced? There is that danger. I mean, there's all other dangers as well. The danger of chasing after the answer to a koan. I mean, it's almost impossible to get around this, you know. And you see people practicing for years and decades, scores of years, trying to answer the same koan over and over and over, and never being able to do it, and getting stuck in a failure death spiral, and more worshiping the teacher instead of working with the teacher. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. In my experience, this is just life. Maybe this is another manifestation of the first noble truth, which is that life is a little bit problematic. There's suffering in it. There's confusion. There's problems. Being alive is a problem. And to do koan practice or not to do koan practice is just another one of those problems. I mean, to recap, I am very grateful for my koan practice. And there's no amount of money that could ever make me get a memory wipe that would eradicate all of my koan practice. There's literally no sum. It was an absolutely invaluable experience, on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a great koan teacher now that a friend of mine works with that I could be going to work with, and I don't, because I don't think it's ultimately necessary, at least not for me at this point. Once one gets the basic principles of death and resurrection and manifesting them both completely, and both of them being manifested completely, one can do that in any activity whatsoever. Koan practice just points this out and is a very beautiful tool for expressing it or manifesting it. That is my take today. If you would like to support this channel, you can go to the aforementioned Patreon page. That's patreon.com/ShozanJackHobner. We got essays up there. We're doing sits. Get a leg up on the spiritual competition and get over there to Patreon, patreon.com/ShozanJackHobner. I've got essays, I've got blog posts. We do meditation sits online. It's a great community there. You can also support this channel by going to the PayPal link, which is in the video description below. You can hit subscribe and hit the like and hit the notifications. All of these things help this channel to grow and